Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. I'm excited that you and all of your parts have taken time to be with me and all of my parts. If you are a coach, a client, a therapist, if you are in business or education, and you're curious about the IFS model, you are in the right place. Now, let's see what happens on today's podcast.
Hey everyone! Today's podcast is with Tiffany Morgan. Tiffany is a well-educated and I think pretty well-known IFS therapist. She's well-known on social media as IFS with Tiff, and she's on Instagram and Facebook, and that's how we connected. And then we met again at the IFS annual conference last year. I tell you that I don't usually tell people's bios. You can just hear it, but I tell you all that because that's really not what this episode's about. It really is about Tiffany sharing her extensive eating disorder treatment history with us. She walks through her experiences and gives listeners a amazing glimpse. I have a cold, so yeah, hopefully it's not too disruptive, but I didn't have a cold when we recorded this. She gives listeners a insight, how about I'll say that, into her internal system and her system. She talks so much about her parts. She's so open and vulnerable, and honestly, I just feel super honored that she shares her story with us. So I think there's two really big, amazing main points that I think you'll hear and will stand out to you. One is the radical difference IFS treatment makes in eating disorders, in the way we look at them and the way we treat them. So, IFS, we look at behaviors that others, and often ourselves, let's be honest, see as troublesome, damaging, inappropriate, toxic, those behaviors and the thoughts, the faulty, irrational, unhealthy, distorted thoughts, we see those behaviors and those thoughts as parts. And those parts that often we don't like and other people don't like, especially when we're looking at anorexia, those parts have a really good reason for doing what they do, and they have a really important function. And often parts believe that they're keeping you alive and they're keeping you away from harm. Tiffany says that she calls her anorexic part Ann, ANN, and what she says is that Ann wanted to be heard, validated, cared for, and valued. And then once that happened, once she was heard, validated, cared for, and valued, then she could relax and soften and let Tiffany help the part that she was protecting, who was called Annie. And Tiffany does an amazing job of explaining all of that. And of course, as we do typically think of these parts, is Anne was seen as everyone as the bad guy, right? She was the one that was causing all these problems, but really Anne was Tiffany's fiercest protector. Just a completely different way of seeing behaviors and thoughts. The other point that I think is super awesome and really stands out to me is the power of witnessing. So oftentimes we don't want to either tell our stories or talk, even go to therapy, because we feel like, or parts of us feel like, we're going to be so flooded and overwhelmed by our story. And so the other thing that really stands out to me is the power of self, our inner self, our higher self, our true self, authentic self, that power of that witnessing our younger parts' stories, our younger parts' trauma. So there's so much power once those protectors step back. There's so much power in this witnessing experience. I wanted to say one last thing before you listen to this episode. I recorded this with Tiff in right before Christmas time, and so I think I say something about her Christmas tree. So you're going to listen to it. Hopefully, you'll listen to this in when it's published, which is February. So you're going to be like, Oh, don't judge Tiff thinking that she's left her Christmas tree up all this time. No, it's actually recorded before Christmas. Also, I wanted to let you know that Tiff has an IFS tattoo on her foot, and there's a picture of her on social media somewhere where she's with Dick, and she's got her foot up, and you could see this beautiful IFS tattoo. It's hilarious. They're both cracking up. It's just this really sweet picture. And so I checked in with Tiff this week while I was editing the podcast, and what she said about her parts, and I love this, is that we used to fist fight and now we hold hands. Isn't that beautiful? We used to fist fight, now we hold hands. I think she's awesome. I think you're really going to love this one. Sorry that my voice is really sounding kind of funny right now. If you want to hang out with Tiffany, tiffanycobbmorgan.com is her website, and obviously go follow her over on Instagram and Facebook. And you can follow me, IFS Tammy, on Instagram, and there is a One Inside Facebook page that you could also go hang out with and chat, ask questions, make comments, etc. Hope everyone's doing well. Enjoy this one. I think it's fantastic. See you guys soon.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So it's so good to see you. It's early where you are.
Yeah,
So-
it's 7.
Yeah. So tell everybody where you are and what you see if you were to look out a window.
Well, right now, as I'm looking out the window, I'd see my Christmas tree decorated. And we would have my porch with a ping pong table and a lot of rocks and some cactus. And a wash is behind our house. Where in Arizona, all the water goes in when we have rains because we have monsoon.
Oh.
Downpours of rain, so it goes all into the wash.
Oh. So it was a wash like a pond or like
It's a dry, I guess you'd say a divot of a hole where a lot of weeds grow, and so water can pour in there, the sand and stuff, and get absorbed, because otherwise we'd have floods everywhere.
Oh, okay. So they put them purposely. Like I lived in New Orleans for a couple of years, and we have all which everybody knows now because of Katrina, but we have the levees. So there's these sort of purposeful levee systems to control the water. So
Yes.
That's what that is. Okay.
Yes.
It's interesting because when I think of Arizona, I think of like dry. I don't think of like monsoons and having to control the water.
I know, it's really weird. It's a lot of stuff that I've never thought of until I moved here.
How long have you been out there?
Oh, I've been here. I moved here in 2007 and had planned to move sooner, but had family, and so this became home.
And you're
Yep.
from this, like Washington. You're from out there, right? You're from out west somewhere.
Originally,
Right.
I'm from Florida.
Oh, from
I grew-
Florida. Okay.
Yeah, 45 minutes away from Disney World.
Okay.
Yep, I grew up there when they first were building it out there, where it was
Shut
just a
up.
magic kingdom. Then I was in Washington State, so you're right. Yeah.
I think that's what I was thinking. Okay. So
Yeah.
how long were you in Florida?
Where I grew up, I was in there throughout high school, and then I moved to North Carolina to go to undergraduate school, and then
Okay.
I lived in Pensacola, Florida, in the naval base out there.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, when we lived in New Orleans, so the listeners probably know that I love the sun and I love the beach. And so we lived in New Orleans and we would drive 4 hours to Pensacola Beach, and because it was magical. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
I would bring my homework, and I remember studying for the GREs. I had this big GRE book, and I studied the
Yes.
whole way there. I studied on the beach, and yeah, driving back, and I always find the water wherever I go.
Me too.
Do
Another
you?
thing we have in common, yes, I have to be by that water. That's why in Arizona, it's like, what?
How did I end up here? I know my husband, there was talk of him moving, or us, slight talk about moving to Ohio. And I was like, no, are you kidding me? That's never going to happen.
Yes.
I'm not going to move to Ohio. I thought we could start with, you sent me a text, and I thought we could start with what you sent me on this text, because I thought it was hilarious. But I thought it would be a good way to start our conversation.
Okay. A part of me is like, oh no, which text?
Which part am I
text?
going to say? I know. We talked about Anne.
Yes.
And so this is what you said. We were talking about the this amazing retreats you were having and doing a year in review, writing and meditation and silent retreats, which I think is such an amazing thing to do, like with full moon, end of year, beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you said these retreats showed me how much I've accomplished in 2019 and how much self energy I possess, all because of IFS and my anorexic part being transformed. She was the director of my system and still is just the roles are different for my parts now. She isn't the
Right.
dictator director now. Love that. She's no longer the dictator director.
Right.
Um, and then you said you like the metaphor of using all the world as a stage and all my parts are part of your life play. And Anne
Right.
is still there. She's the
Yes.
director and she's cast herself in the lead role. So I think I thought that was beautiful as for a
Thank
text. I was
you.
like, wow. And so maybe we could just start there talking about Anne and maybe a little bit of history with her and just talking about what you said in that text because it's just beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really inspiring because I had that time, that silent meditation, and I just saw Anne, and it just made so much sense with this like metaphor. Is Anne is my anorexic part, and she came around when, let's say, the director of the plays were not there. Meaning, I see it as self. Like director is when it's running smoothly, it's self, right? Self energy,
Yeah.
and all the parts in the system are unblended and they're just going and flowing. So Anne, when she became the director, it's because the adults around us were not being directors and things became chaotic. So she stepped up to the plate, no pun intended, as an anorexic, and she just wanted to control the whole play. She wanted to tell the parts what role they were going to play, what lighting, what setting, how we were going to live, who was going to cast, who was going to be the writer. And she wanted to dictate the whole thing, very
Mm.
controlling, like anorexia usually is when trauma can happen, can come out. And the young ones in the play were not safe anymore, so she really wanted to get there and protect them because there was no myself as when I was like 9, 10, 11 had been sacrificed. It was gone because it wasn't to be trusted because the adults were not there to help. And so how would I know how to have self then at the time?
Yeah. So I love that metaphor too because she was like looked around and was like there are no adults, there's no director. Someone needs to be a director and I've got this energy and I've got this passion or something so that I'm no one else is stepping up so I'm going to step up. So even it's funny because we say all parts are welcome, but okay, it's like, well, is my anorexic part welcome?
Mm-hmm.
No. So, that's a really good example of parts that we often are not welcome in our system. But as all parts have a function, she had a good intention and she had a function. There was a reason why she stepped up.
Yes, very much so. And that's the thing is I learned to at the end I learned to welcome her. At first, through my treatment I didn't because I was told not to.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit because you and I talked about treatment because you've been in treatment for a long time and then you started IFS treatment and that was a game changer. So I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about what treatment was like before,
Yes.
whatever you're comfortable with, and then maybe how IFS changed that.
Sure. It was about 1989 that I first came out to a friend. Like I thought I invented the eating disorder. Like it wasn't talked about that much back in the 80s. And I finally received some help because I became really scared that my system like was getting weak and stuff. So in 1990, went into a treatment center, and Anne at the time was very directing the play and didn't want to move over. And what she decided is like they were the producers. The treatment team came in and they were producers,
Okay, yeah.
and they wanted to So the producers, hire, fire directors, and they give them money.
Right.
So these producers wanted to fire Anne.
Yeah.
And the way they wanted to do it was not to get to know her. They wanted to force feed her, which make her gain weight, give her a tube down the nose, force feed her. And she did not know what was going on. And everyone else in the play were getting so frantic and chaotic, right? Because this was what they were used to.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't get to know her. They made the force feeding happen. And then they tried to tell her what she was thinking, like cognitive behavioral therapy. What she was thinking was faulty. And her assumptions were not correct. And they wanted to change her thoughts and her behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as we know with that, it's all about the prefrontal cortex, and it doesn't reach the prefrontal cortex does not communicate to the amygdala, right? So all the stuff in the amygdala is where the trauma is. So to the little ones in the system, it didn't make sense because they still had all this trauma.
Yeah. So to say that's beautiful. And to say that a different way is like, I say this to my parts and probably to my patients all the time. When we start getting intellectual, it's like, okay, would you talk to a 5-year-old that way? Would you intellectualize something to a 5-year-old? No, because they're not going to understand. It's not going to matter. And it's not going to be effective. So that makes a ton of sense that, cognitive behavioral therapy, while it has lots of good things, and it was, super popular, is how I was trained, probably how lots of us were trained, and was super popular for a long time, that intellectualizing to younger parts of us isn't going to work. And actually, it sounds like it made your parts even more scared.
Yes, because they still had all the feelings, like the trauma was still there, but their protector, which was Anne, was being like fired from her job basically as a director, and these new people were coming in, and they were not getting to the trauma. They were not getting to what was going on.
Right. So it's interesting because then it's like your system, your little parts were used to Anne, right? So I'm sure you had parts that didn't like her and hated her and all that stuff.
Of course.
But then these other parts, it sounds like your exiles were used to her and felt safe with her.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so she had a little one she called her sister, and her name's Annie, and that's the one that really was freaking out because that was very much her protector.
Yeah.
Anne was, so.
Okay, yeah. So then you're in treatment, and how old are you at the time?
When I was first in treatment, I was, I think, 21, 22.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did your system react to that? Like, was there another director elected, or did it just become this sort of fight between Anne and the producers?
It was mostly the other director that they tried to elect, where I would say the treatment staff, correct?
Yeah.
So, and it was still the producers, but then they had like the other staff that tried to become directors, but Anne was holding on so hard that she was still in the directing thing, but very weak. It's like they sapped all of her brain power out. And we started to get strong, which what I mean, we as in my system. And unfortunately, there was a psychologist there that was sexually abused myself and other patients, and they ended up losing their license and their job in this one treatment center, which really said to my system, do not trust these new producers. Don't trust treatment providers. They don't know what they're doing.
Right. So Anne was probably even more powerful.
Yes, when we got out of that place, she went full steam ahead and lost all the weight and took over again.
Okay. Yeah. And doesn't that make sense though? Because here you're going into a place to get help, and not only are you not getting help in a way that makes sense for your system, it's like you're getting bullied into getting help, and then in the face of that, you're abused and traumatized again.
Yes.
What happened after that?
Like,
what's next?
I know. So I went in and out of treatments because at the time, the producers, if you will, the treatment providers, And, they did the best they could of what they knew, did not get to the underlying trauma. The only time they tried to was one of the last treatment centers that I went to, and they tried to hypnotize me, and that bypassed Anne altogether.
Oh, right.
So,
okay.
yeah, so hypnotize, that knocked her out. Basically, she had no say. They say don't push protectors. So they pushed the protector of Anne out of the way and tried to get right to the exiles.
Yeah.
And that got interrupted mighty quick because I ended up pregnant with my husband at the time. And then he tried to sue the treatment facility I was in, saying that they were going to put me through so much trauma and make me lose the baby. So they had to have me leave the treatment center in the middle
cow.
in the middle of this hypnosis. So when I left there, my system was totally a mess, and that was in the year 2000, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Let's pause the story for a second and
Okay.
talk a little bit about Anne as a protector and
Okay.
the way we think now and the way now about how she's trying to help, how she's trying to be helpful.
So right now, my transformation of what happened with her.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I became really, she took over. Yes.
Actually, I think this is what I'm trying to ask.
Okay.
So I think what I want to talk about is the idea of how Anne was working in your system for good and how she was the director of your system, and how when we think about anorexia or an eating disorder behavior or any sort of behavior that other parts really hate, the mind shift of how we think about how that part's trying to help.
Okay. So basically how at first when she was helping, she was losing the weight to be controlled. And that part, she provided them a sense of safety, because one of the things that she wanted to make sure that didn't happen was us be sexually abused again. So the thinner we were more likely not to attract, in her mind, the way that we would be attracted to other men or women would want to take advantage of us, because we would be hopefully all bones, but we never felt like we were thin enough because the body image never got to us being thin enough, even though we were, obviously anorexic weight.
Gotcha. Okay. So that makes a ton of sense. So I think about, and I want the listeners to think about whether it's their own kid that's suffering with an eating disorder, or themselves, or clients that they're seeing in their office. That idea that if I'm saying to let's say I have a 13-year-old girl that's restricting, and doesn't have her period anymore, and everyone's all upset and freaking out. And if the part of her that's doing that behavior believes that it's going to keep her safe, then no matter how many times her mom weighs her or the doctor tells her she can't do soccer, none of that stuff is going to matter, because that part is saying we'll never be sexually abused again. If we look like a bag of bones, then we'll never be sexually abused again. So if I don't hear that or know that, and I'm just trying to be like, I got to weigh you every day, you got to sit at the counselor's office and eat lunch, then I'm going to become that bad producer that I don't want to be.
Exactly.
Or mom, parent, kid, guidance counselor, all the people that are trying to do good and have such good intention, we're not really listening to the function of the behavior.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's what IFS did provide finally, is the new producers were listened to Anne say, they got to know her. They said, whoa, you're working really hard. They gave her compassion. They gave her a sense of purpose and understanding, and they got curious. We talk about the C's, right? They became curious of, well, what is, we know you're working so hard, so something is going on. Could let us get to know you? It was a lot of, at first they did the access to me because I didn't have self, right? I had self, but we couldn't find it.
Right. Self was so buried, or self was so
Yes.
covered. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So these treatment
Yeah.
providers that came in doing IFS were just so loving and tender with Anne, and she's never experienced that before. They always wanted to fire her from being director. They were saying, how can we make you a better director? How could we keep you having some sense in the system in your play and do it in a different way? And she softened. She's so softened.
Unbelievable. And I'm guessing that was shocking for your system. Was like, wait, we're so used to hating her or having this internal battle. It was like, wait, we're going to friend her and be curious about her. Yeah,
Yes,
that's a
yes.
totally different way of looking at just thinking of like behavior. If you're not IFS, sort of thinking of behaviors that cause us problems, that's a totally different way of looking at those behaviors, because those behaviors are parts. And so it's a completely different way of looking at it.
Exactly. They didn't tell her thinking was faulty, that it was inappropriate, what she was
Oh,
doing. They
yeah.
listened, and it became something that she became willing to open her ears up and willing
Mm.
to listen to, hey, these people really care. They're not just, if you will, trying to kill me or fire me or make me fat or, make my thinking changing.
It removed the shame. There was so much.
Yes. Oh,
Yes.
yes, exactly. I'm sorry. I know I was going to think
No,
of that earlier.
no,
Shame.
that's
That was
okay.
it.
Yeah.
Yes. And I have a shameful part that is named Shamim.
Oh.
And yeah, I have actually two. One's an older one and one's a younger one. And I am apologizing to them right now. I'm suing self to just like an apology and they're thanking you for bringing this up. Yes, they felt heard and they peeked out of their hiding place for the first time and were listening and were curious themselves. And my whole system actually relaxed. Like you could feel exactly the warmth like of a fireplace and the sun and just really the calm of self, right? The calm of the treatment providers, the calm inside myself. The two shamims were out and I will say that it didn't really happen until I had a trained IFS level 1 therapist. I've had other IFS informed therapists I tried before and they weren't trained. And so it was a lot of backlash because of bypassing Anne again, even though they
Oh,
tried
okay.
they tried, but they were not fully trained. So,
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So then as you got to know Anne, you got to know these shame parts.
Yeah,
They come out.
yes.
Okay.
Like I knew they existed before, but they were so in shame that they didn't want to come forth.
Of course. That makes sense. Shame would hide.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make a ton of
Yeah.
sense? Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you were in treatment and you started learning about IFS and started having this different experience in treatment with bringing curiosity to Anne. And then it sounds like then there was more self began to emerge a little bit. So let's talk about that.
Yes. Yes. It was beautiful when my therapist at the time had wanted to hear the story of the one she protected, the witnessing part. There was a lot to write about, and I wrote about it, and she was being listened to from self. Because this is where the treatment provider slowly stepped aside as she saw self energy coming from me, where I became open and calm, and Anne was willing to step aside a little bit because she knew she was getting help.
Wow. Okay. So Anne, when self came online a little bit, Anne was willing to step aside a little bit because she knew she was getting help.
Yes.
And that help was not the help that had been pushed upon her. Like this
No.
help, we're helping you. And she's like, you're not helping me. Well,
Right.
she actually felt help probably for the first time that she was going to actually get help.
Yes, she felt like she wanted the help for her, not for you're going to get, this level moved up. You're gonna be able to go out in the outing with all your peers in the treatment center. You're
Yeah.
gonna be able to get married and eat that piece of cake. None of that. None of that. She was getting help because she was being heard and listened to and validated and valued.
Oh, valued. That's so, this isn't funny, but it's funny. It's the only word I can think of because that's what we usually do. Like when I was in grad school, I worked at a psychiatric hospital in New Orleans, and there was an eating disorder unit, a trauma unit, and I worked mostly on the trauma unit, but I worked some on the eating disorder unit, and that's exactly what they would do. You eat all this food, and then you would be able to get a pass to go out. But it's like those behavior rewards were not rewards for that protector. That makes so much sense.
Right? Yeah, it didn't make sense to her what they were doing, but she knew that she had to do it to get out, to get control
Yeah,
again.
right. Okay. So how interesting that when we listened to her and we said, I want to hear what you have to say. I know you're here for good. I know you're trying to help. Then that's when transformation started.
Yes, you got it. You got it.
Mm.
And the story, Annie's story, the one she protected, came out on paper, and then she got to share it with the therapist. And Anne stepped aside, and we got to ask Anne, where do you want to be when Annie tells her story? Where do you want to do you want to say it in a group? And Anne said no. And she wanted to say it just with the therapist. So she was giving choices at the time.
Wow. Right. Yeah. I love that. And was that the first time you had heard or witnessed Annie's story?
Yes. I had honestly had flashbacks before, a lot of chronic PTSD. And this was the first time the story came out in a succinct way that made sense, that was not fragmented almost. It was more smoother, if you will.
Yeah.
And it made so much sense. And I had so much compassion for Annie as self. It was so beautiful. Where before, Tammy, to tell you the truth, when I went through treatment a long time ago, and they said, picture your inner child inside. And all I could see was her folding her arms, her back to me, and saying, I hate you, or screaming, I hate you.
Mm.
And this was the first time she looked at me. She could come and she wanted to sit on my lap, and I could hold her, and she wanted me to buy her stuffed animals. So it was a totally different experience. Yeah.
And that makes so much sense because if she was experiencing self in a different way.
Yeah. She wasn't experiencing a teenager trying to control the system, and her.
Yeah, right. So then you were in treatment, learning about IFS, got connected to self, started healing the exiles, and then more IFS therapy, and then you ended up doing the level 1 training. When did that happen in the
How did that
story?
transition?
Yeah.
So I always knew I wanted to be a therapist from day one. When I was little, I'd sit in, remember we had bookstores in the malls?
Oh, yeah.
In indoor malls. I'd sit in the bookstores and read self-help books when I was in elementary school, and all my friends would be like, what are you doing? Let's go shopping. Let's go get clothes or toys or look at the records, because they were records back
Oh,
then.
yeah, record stores. And there were record stores.
Yes,
right? We don't have record stores.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, no, I have to sit at the self-help section in
Oh
the
my
bookstore.
gosh.
So I always knew
Aw.
I wanted to be a therapist. And even back then, I had that perfectionistic part that said, I'm not going to be a therapist until I have everything understood within myself.
Wow.
Because I knew that I had, even back there, some trauma going on. I just didn't know what to call it, or any of the verbs, of course, verbiage. Then when I went to undergraduate school, I graduated I changed my majors 3 times until I went with finally what I wanted to was with psychology. And then I wanted to go immediately to get my counseling degree or social work degree and master's. And I knew I was not well.
Mm.
I knew that I had an eating disorder, and I said, I can't help people until I'm recovered.
Mm.
So I majored in clinical teaching, special education, focusing on learning disabilities as my first master. My second master's, I got educational leadership, instructional technology, because I still was not well enough. Even though I had recovery a bit under my shoulders, I still was not healed from IFS. I had not made that yet. But I was in a sense of recovery, even though the trauma wasn't healed. Then I finally decided to go for my counseling degree because I once learned that you didn't have to be 100% perfect as a counselor. Because I had several counselors along the way that told me that and showed me that by explaining their stories a bit, which were helpful to me.
Good. Yeah.
Once I got the counseling degree, my son entered kindergarten, and I found, he was diagnosed with high functioning autism. So I wanted to be home with him as a stay-at-home mom. I was doing that, and then I got sick again with the eating disorder because I started having flashbacks again. Because once again, my system wasn't healed. The flashbacks, my littles wanted to tell me something wasn't right. Still had this trauma. And they say when your kid becomes an age that you were when the trauma happens, things will come up. And that's what was happening.
Gotcha.
Then I knew eventually that I had to go back in treatment. And then that's when I went to the IFS treatment. And I said, I'm not going to go to any other kind of treatment. And it was such a passion of mine that I said, I'm going to become trained in this, and that's what I'm going to use in my practice. That's when I did level 1, and I haven't stopped since. I just finished level 2, intimacy from the inside out, so I can work with couples. And I've been asked to be a program assistant. I couldn't because I was in this other training at the time. My goal is to become a program assistant and do level 3 in 2020 and to become certified. So
I love your I love training, I love school parts, because clearly you're like, I have 10 master's degrees, and
I know.
well, I mean, I wonder if that's the part that is connected somehow to that little girl who was sitting there reading self-help books.
Oh, I never thought of that. See, you're brilliant. See, that's why you're a therapist too. That's brilliant. Oh my gosh, yes. She's jumping up and down. She heard you. She's like, yes, 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 yes. You got it.
Yay. Oh, that makes me feel, my parts are like, yay.
She's peeking around the corner. She's like checking you out.
Oh, hi, sweetheart. Aw.
She knows that she knows IFS voice, so she's like, she's another one. So thank you. And I'm saying as she's coming now, she's gonna be on my lap. And I'm with my dog on my lap too, so she'll have to share space.
Oh, what's your doggy's name?
This is Holly, and this is my therapy dog when I'm on Zoom. She's a little Dachshund, a mini Dachshund.
She's beautiful.
Thank you.
Tiffany's dog is black and has like these brown spots all over her face, and she's really pretty.
Mini Dachshund.
She's little. She's
a hot dog.
Aww. I like her face. I want to scrunch up her face. She's cutie.
Yes.
I love that.
Thank you.
So I think let's just check inside and see what else your system wants to say. What else feels like important to let listeners know? Either about your treatment or about your story.
Right. Yeah, so I talked about the witnessing part of the unburdening. I'm checking in with Anne and Annie both because it was Annie's unburdening, and Anne did witness it. So we did the witnessing part, and then I wanted to talk about the actual retrieval and where we went.
Great. Okay.
You and I had talked, Tammy, about loving water. I was fortunate enough to be by the Pacific when this occurred, this unburdening, and my shamanic healer, who is trained in IFS, and I went to the Pacific and had the actual unburdening there. We had the retrieval. That's where Annie wanted to go. We called in all the shamanic type of helpers. And by the way, she did a workshop in this last IFS conference on shamanic healing and IFS. She did that, and she called in her shamanic stuff, and I called in all of mine as IFS. I called in my people that I wanted to witness the unburdening process, and Annie chose to let everything go into the Pacific Ocean and transform it into beautiful food and smells that the birds could have, that the little fishies can have, and that people could have that enjoy the beach. So the element was the water. Transformation was just these beautiful, almost like glitter. She wanted like glittery dust of things that transformed into the food and beautiful everything. And then we saw birds flying over, and we got to choose what Annie wanted to do, and she just wanted to be free and play and just romp around and have all the creativity that she could have in the system. Hence, one of the reasons why I let her, she's involved in helping me do my social media with IFS. And it's a big deal for her that we do the Instagram, which I'll tell you my handle and everything later. And then Anne got to witness it, and guess what she wanted to do? Of course, she's always wanted to be, these are her three things: a fashion designer. She loves fashion. She wanted to be in charge of the whole IFS protocol and what we do with it. And she wants to, our ultimate goal is she wants to go back and do it's a program in California. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a spiritual program combined with neuropsychology.
Wow.
So that's our PhD. And we said, even if we're in our 60s and we get it, that's our ultimate school thing. After we have everything done with IFS, as far as everything we can attend and do.
How are they feeling right now, telling me and all the listeners that, sort of just putting it out there in the open world? How is it for them to say all that?
It's great. Actually, when you said that, I usually, in IFS, sometimes they say people go get in a conference table, and the part that wants to be heard will sometimes like take the head seat while self is there as well, like listening. Like it's a big family meeting. Mine love the circle because I was in so much treatment, and we learned to be in circles and groups, right?
Yeah.
So mine sit on the ground. So they sit in circles. So when you said that, they all came in their circle and they said, we're here together. There are some parts that have not been unburdened, and they know it, and they see it in the healing of others. Some are not ready, and they know their time will come. And some I'm actually working with as we speak. So it's a constant, just beautiful cycle of you come, you've seen what's happened, and you have more freedom, you get more parts in the system, and they all are there. We use self, they allow self to be in parenting, reaching my son. Because I had a parenting part, and her name is Morgan, my last name Morgan, and she's very loving. And though she has an agenda, she'll come in with her agenda with, we want our son to have this kind of look when we go out, with what he looks like. We want him to have good hygiene. Yes, any parent does, but maybe we want him to wear something a little bit different than he's wearing. So I talk to Morgan a lot and say, as self, I hear you. It makes sense why you would want son to look nice. And also, I don't want to give him a body image kind of thing. This is the way you're going to look, because your body will look better in this. And we go back to Anne's stuff, right?
Right. Oh my goodness. I didn't even think about that. I was just thinking of it as like, because how old is he now? He's a little
He
bit
will
older than my
be,
son.
yeah, he'll be 11 January 6th.
Okay, yeah. So I was thinking about that, but right. So it's not just I want him to look a certain way, which of course is true. And Morgan, like just sort of simple parenting. But then when we have Anne come up about body image and appearance, that kind of muddies the waters a little bit.
It does. And I will tell your listeners that body image is the last to go. And sometimes I will be looking in the mirror and I will see myself a bit bigger than I know logically I am. And Anne is willing to acknowledge that and say she knows that it's a part of her that still needs a bit of, education and healing. She doesn't fight it. She's able to listen because I come with a compassion like, oh, Anne, baby, I know this is hard. I know that it's so hard and you work so hard. Because, I was anorexic for years.
Yeah.
So to think that the last part of that is easy, it's not. Because society, right? We have posts on it. We have everything. We have this time of year, the body image. We have, how are we going to look with relatives that we haven't seen? So not even like my big, strong Ann part. Other parts of me have that, just like any other person that doesn't have an eating disorder, correct?
Yes, definitely. That is such a good point. And that idea that the body image is last to go, I'm really curious about that and how much of that is not even connected to having an eating disorder. It's about being a woman or a man too, but a woman in America.
Yeah, and the men, they, a lot of that is with the muscles, building up muscles. This is how we should look.
Yeah.
And I did see a little boy in treatment when I was in there. He was only 8 years old and he had anorexia. So
Oh my
the
gosh.
prevalence of that. And I was going to give you statistics on the eating disorder. I did speak to a friend and a colleague who is, her title, she works with Eating Resource Center, and she's, I think, the informational specialist. And she said, don't go by the statistics that are even on the NEDA site, National Eating Disorder Association. She said, because some of them are, I can't remember her words, but they're not accurate a little bit. So I don't feel comfortable giving you statistics right now.
About like statistics on like gender or on how prevalent it is?
Like
Just
how prevalent, like it's the second most deadly out of all like mental illnesses, if you will.
Yeah.
The first was, I think, substance abuse, although I have read it was opiates. So it's very confusing. And it used to be the first deadliest like a few years ago.
Well, doesn't that explain though that parts of us, especially like my parenting part or my caregiver part, are going to freak out if my kid or my cousin or my friend or my client has anorexia, and then I have it's the second leading like mental illness.
Yes.
Yeah. So then then I'm going to be like, you need to eat, you need to stop, and I'm going to come with that energy, which is not going to help the system.
Right. So I'm being a therapist now in self. If I have my clients that have eating disorders, I know to have compassion for it, to stay calm, not say you need to eat that frantic because that's not going to work, and to know that, I hear you. And yes, if you have, we will work as a team. I work as a team approach, with the dietitian, and we'll get, check for your medical needs because we do have compassion for you. We'll check and make sure that the blood work's okay. And we're going to work to see what's going on, that you're holding on to this so strong. We want to hear about it. We focus on what's going on with calm voice. Yeah.
Yeah, I can feel that because I was actually feeling frantic. Listeners can't see me, but I was moving my hands and moving my body in this sort of frantic, because I've been in that situation, whether at the hospital or even in private practice, where it's like, oh, everybody's freaking out. But yeah, even you speaking like that, it just calmed my system. And what a different approach.
Yeah. To give them permission to, work. And like we say, we don't push protectors. And that's what I tell them. We're not going to push this part of you.
Yeah.
Let's start off with, even if he or she or it, doesn't want to talk, Maybe they want to draw, maybe, and then I bring in, the figurines. I have little miniatures. I have those IFS cards, those cards.
Yeah.
So yeah, any way that I can get, even if it's a movement, even if they don't want to, just move, do something.
Yeah, and that probably would help connect to body a little bit if they moved a little bit.
Yes, in the body. And, we don't, and another treatment provider I work with right now is IFS informed. She's a dietitian and she knows a lot about IFS. She's read a lot. So that's nice that she can use part language with the client too.
Yeah. I'm going to back up. I'm going to back way up because I had a thought about trauma and about Annie. And I was thinking about when you were having her write, or she was wanting to write the story of her trauma, and how when you were talking about that didn't sound like a horrific, flooding, re-traumatizing experience.
Good point. Yes, because a lot of times we say we can't have our clients, which makes sense, relive the trauma, right?
Yeah.
And then in IFS, we say, let's witness this. Okay, so what helped with that is Annie knew that self was there. When we were writing, when I wrote through her, she picked a playlist and she put Disney Dumbo music on. She had her Broadway shows that Annie on. She had all her little music that she loved that would soothe her when we were writing. She had the stuffed animals she wanted on the bed, and we did it a little bit at a time. And if she wanted her, a blankie or something like that, I let her have it. So I didn't push her. Sometimes she could write 2 lines and she asked to stop, or another part blended. I will say another part would blend to protect her. It might have been not Anna, it might have been someone else. And then I would have to stop and work with that part. So yeah, you're right. When I said it, it sounded like it went so smooth, and it was, it was a self to part, like we say, self to part relationship.
Yeah, I think the other difference too is when if I'm in self and I'm witnessing, then I'm not feeling all the feelings of that part.
Yes. She didn't. If Annie wanted to show me one, she would show me through tears. Aww. And then I would stop and I would say, okay, she blended. And my healer at the time said she wants to show you that. She just wants you to show how it feels. So I would let her in to let me show. And then once I said, I get it. I understand what it feels like. I get it. Then she felt heard and would go back to writing her story. She was writing it.
Yeah. I love that, because I love how that self to part relationship helped deal with the trauma, like that, like dealing with Anne, that protector first, who was sort of the gatekeeper, and then once we have a good relationship with her and we've got self on board or at the head of the conference table, then we can go to the little ones in the basement, because self is there, and then we aren't. It actually is a beautiful experience. It's not how people think about, like, I'm going to have to go and talk about my trauma, and I don't want to do that, because I have parts that are like, nope. I just don't want to go there. Thank you very much. But this sounds like such a completely different healing experience.
Yes, it was. And I think before, when in treatment, they wanted me to do it, and they said, right, this is before IFS, write with the left hand and let the trauma come out and stuff. So my left hand would be writing, and it would be like saying these things, and I would freak out. And honestly, I didn't have the self part relationship at the time. I had Anne come in again. And of course, then I would honestly want to manipulate the food the next meal.
Of course she would.
Yeah, right?
Yes. She's no dummy.
But this time it didn't do that. Anne didn't have to do that, because she knew self was starting to come in and listen. And yeah, it was beautiful. It was so beautiful.
Oh, so one of the other things we talked about, anything else about your story you want to share before we talked about, we don't need to, but like advice for clinicians and parents and caregivers?
With the eating disorder?
Yeah.
For the eating disorder? Honestly, I think that a lot of parents, and I've heard this, will feel the blame, correct?
Okay.
Of
Yeah.
that they're a cause of the eating disorder, or they're causing the client to have more of the eating disorder because of what they're doing. And to offer them either offer them to maybe find an IFS therapist so their parts can be heard.
Yeah. Right.
Right? So
Yeah.
or to them to get their own IFS healer or whatever, because once they start listening to their parts, their scared parts, they won't be so blended when working and when being with their kids.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then for clinicians, I would very much say to stay in self, to not get, because we can, as I'll say this as a recovered anorexic, be very manipulating, especially if we feel like we're getting fired from our director's job. And does that
Right.
make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So for clinicians to very much get curious about what the anorexia is doing, how it's protecting, and really sit with that and be patient with that. Because a lot of times the client might not even know, because they're so used to the words fat. You're trying to make me fat. You're trying to make me gain weight. You're trying to take this away from me. This is all I have. If the client needs to say that over and over again, that's what they need to do, and just kind of say, okay, I'm getting curious with you. What does that mean when you're fat? And just go at their pace. And for health reasons, yes, that becomes what do you do? And that's a whole other thing. The client's will to die, you have suicidal clients, and anorexia and eating disorders are not there for death. Like, that's not a suicidal. I want everyone to realize that that's not a suicidal gesture, because a lot of times people don't think they're not going to die. We're not going to die with this, correct?
Right. Yeah. 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 I really love how compassionate you are, not only towards your system and your parts, but even the helpers, the medical professionals, even the past people as you talk about it, you talk about even them with compassion.
Yeah, because I realize a lot of them, have had parts when they were working, and they don't have IFS. So
Yeah.
a lot of them were in their therapist parts, they had their agenda. And that's how I know if I'm at a therapist part, because I will have an agenda
Yeah.
instead of, self does not have agenda. They have healing and harmony, right?
Yeah.
So when I feel that therapist part coming in with an agenda, like, I want you to, I'll say to my clients, and then I'll stop myself and I'll say, okay, that was my therapist part.
Yeah.
I'm going to invite you to, because self has healing and harmony. And from that place, I invite you to do this for homework. Right? And
Yeah.
my whole voice changes when I'm in self, I notice.
I
With
feel it in my
clients.
body, right? My body, I feel like I'm rigid, standing rigid, and I don't know how to describe what I'm doing right now. My whole
You
body
soften,
softens. Yeah.
soften,
Yeah.
and your eyes soften, and your face even softens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. My eyebrow thing, my thinking part. Yeah, that's often. Well, I really appreciate you being on. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
Tell everyone your Instagram handle, how they can get in touch with you, and what they would like. What are you open for? What are you open for people to get in touch with you about?
Okay.
Did that make any sense? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So to get in touch with me about is, I do offer therapy services using internal family systems in Arizona. I will offer that for other people if they have a therapist in another state. I don't do Zoom IFS in another state because I'm not licensed in another state.
Yeah.
If they have a therapist and they want me to be a part of their treatment team to bring in my IFS as a practitioner, I'll love to work with them and their therapist. together.
Gotcha.
And right now, my website is tiffanycobbmorgan.com, TIFFANYCOBBMORGAN.com. I'm also on Psychology Today. On Instagram, I am ifs.therapy.tiff. And on Facebook, I am Internal Family Systems with Tiffany. I also am going to become certified. My next goal is I'm in International Association for Trauma Professionals. I want to go through a certification process with them, and International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. And I want to, next thing is I want to really become certified in working with, and I can now, working with dissociative identity disorder clients, DID, because this part work would be really reach them. So that's what I want to offer next.
Yeah, that sounds great. I actually had somebody, we should stay in, obviously we're going to stay in touch anyways, but
Yes.
we're social media buddies. But I actually had someone ask me to do a podcast on IFS and DID. And so that's something that maybe later next year we could talk about, because I haven't done that yet. But I was like, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I would love to do that once I'm going to take some of the training and stuff. So I have experience, working with, but I want to get the training. That's important to me, as I've talked about, just being my perfectionistic part, I guess, that doesn't have to be perfect, but with like actual training in that, even though parts work is training almost with itself, it's just a lot more in extreme parts. Yeah.
Yep. I get that. Tiff, if you weren't doing all the stuff that you do, i.e. going to school in some way or another.
Being a mom.
Yeah.
A partner.
That's a big job.
Partner.
Oh, that's a really big job. I ignore that job a lot.
Being a mom or a partner?
The partner part.
Oh, yeah. I love my partner. So
I love that you love your partner. That's evident. That's evident. I love that.
And she knows a lot of IFS too, so it's very helpful.
Yeah.
What would I do?
Yeah, what would you do instead?
Okay, so I was thinking, I know for a fact my other dream was to work with dolphins, and like people have service dogs. I love to work with dolphins and people that can, like autistic people and other kind of people that could heal through the touch and the work of dolphins. And my other thing that I would love to do is to have a big farm room for taking in dogs that are abandoned and abused, and just loving them up.
I love that. Have you ever done like swimming with dolphins? Have you ever done one of those things? Like at SeaWorld or something like that?
At SeaWorld, actually, I lived 45 minutes away from there growing up, and I used to spend all my time at the dolphin feeding pool. Another thing, my friends would be like, let's go see Shamu. Let's go. No, I want to be with the dolphins. So I didn't get to swim with them. It is on my bucket list. And it's definitely on my bucket list. So yes. Have you?
No.
Oh.
I don't know that I would want to. I don't know. I would be happy to look at them and maybe put my hand in the water and touch them.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Yeah. I think there's something about, like, I wouldn't want to go, people go swimming with the
stingrays?
Yeah, no.
I did that. I did that too. I did that.
You did? What was that like?
It was hilarious because one of the stingrays was chasing this woman and tried to get her in the butt.
I love it. See, that's why I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do that. No, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I hear that part. I know.
I don't know what that's about, but it was a strong no. So that tells me that's a part, right? It has some energy around it that was like, nope. Yeah. I don't know. Interesting.
Yep. More work.
I know. Great. Tiffany, this was fantastic.
Thank you.
Really great.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored. I love your podcast. I'm learning so much. All your guests have taught me so much.
Good. Thank you. And I appreciate your support and encouragement. And I just really appreciate you as a friend.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time. Today's episode was sponsored by Brighter Vision. What's the point of having a beautiful website if it doesn't attract the clients you want to see? As the worldwide leaders of website design for therapists, Brighter Vision sees this issue happen way too often. A nice-looking website doesn't equate to a successful website. The truth is, your current website might even be turning off potential clients. That's where Brighter Vision comes in. Brighter Vision's team of website designers will create a website that is centered around attracting and retaining your ideal client so that you can have a nice-looking website as well as a successful one. Better yet, Brighter Vision is offering $100 off exclusively for listeners of the One Inside podcast. To take advantage of this offer, simply go to brightervision.com/inside. Again, that's brightervision.com/inside.